You're looking over the fence at a schoolyard in Cleveland, Ohio, and here's what you see. It is recess. The first grade children are playing together. One youngster stands alone. He's the new boy in school. It's his first day. He has been teased mercilessly, has already been given an unflattering nickname, and now he is abandoned and wondering why. The boy is a likely target for ridicule. In the first place, he's dressed differently than the other boys. His elegant attire is the sort you might find in a British school. Eton collar, flowing tie. And that's understandable, too. The youngster has only recently moved with his parents from England. He was born in Eltham, a London suburb. He would still be there, as a matter of fact, had his father's irresponsibility not interfered with the family's business. Dad's one of those men who believes himself to be higher born than his position and means would indicate. Even now he fancies himself an English gentleman, when in reality he is no more in Cleveland than he was in Britain, a fairly talented stonemason with a penchant for fast horses and slow gin. Of course, it's really too early to tell. Dad seems to have mended many of his ways. This is the family's opportunity for a fresh start, he says. Whatever enthusiasm Dad has, his young son shares little of it. He's the little fellow standing alone in the schoolyard, wearing that fancy English schoolboy suit. The propriety of his manner and pretentiousness of his clothing are misplaced as a coat of arms hanging in a locker room, and yet here he is, on his first day of school, saddled with the image. His British propriety is also responsible for the nickname his schoolmates have given him. In an old world academic environment, you see, it is quite correct to introduce one's self by reciting one's last name first, and that's what the new boy has done. When curious fellow first graders asked who he was, he gave the last name and then the first name, and both names, in that order, produced the sound of a single unrelated word. I know this sounds complicated, but stay with me. Embarrassed over the misunderstanding, the youngster contemplates his options. Maybe his parents could just send him to a different school. Or perhaps right then and there, to undo what has already been done, he could change his name. After all, it was his first day in school. He had spent his earliest years in England, where it was quite acceptable, even expected, that a schoolboy should introduce himself by stating his last name first. But unfortunately for this youngster, his first and last name, in reverse order, sounded together very much like another English word, and that word had become his nickname. The precepts of psychological onomatology state that the names of individuals often affect their lives, even their destinies. Well, the destiny of this youngster you've just met was success beyond imagination. You see, the lonely little boy's unwanted nickname was Hopelessly. His first name was Leslie. His last name was Hopelessly. His new first name, the name he eventually chose for himself, was Robert. And since the day of that significant decision, nobody ever called him anything but Bob Hope. And now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Mr. Harvey explained that Bob Hope was born in England and immigrated to America. Bob Hope and his large family of 8 left England on the SS Philadelphia and reached Ellis Island, New York on March 30th, 1908, where they were processed into the country. The family then moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Bob was never comfortable with his given name. When he was 12 years old, he began singing, dancing, and performing comedy acts on the street to make pocket money. He would do any sort of performance, anywhere, just to make a few coins. In 1915, under the name of Lester Hope, he entered an amateur contest in which he impersonated Charlie Chaplin. In 1915, Charlie Chaplin was just becoming a household name. A year earlier, he was virtually unknown. Bob Hope won the contest. In his teens and 20s, Bob earned money in various occupations. He was a boxer for a short time, a butcher's assistant, he worked in a motor car company, and even as a lineman for the power company. While working as a lineman for the Ohio and Southern Ohio Power Company in 1921, he and his brother Jim were clearing trees. Bob climbed up a tall pine tree to tie a tow rope to it. His brother had cut only part of the way through the base, but he'd cut too far. Bob felt the tree begin to slowly tilt to the ground. Then Bob realized the tree was going to fall. He scrambled his way around the tree to get on its upper side. The tree crashed to the ground with Bob still attached to it. His face smashed into the tree and was crushed. When Bob woke up, he was in the hospital. They wouldn't give him a mirror for 3 weeks, he said. He was relieved to learn that there were no brain injuries. The doctors, he said, had to rearrange my nose and face. His distinctive look was due to that accident. After Bob recuperated, he and his girlfriend at the time took dancing lessons. He befriended Lloyd Durbin, another student at the dancing school, and they performed anywhere people would watch them. In 1925, silent film comedian Fatty Arbuckle saw them perform and got them work with Hurley's Jolly Follies, a touring troupe of entertainers. Later, Bob, George Barron joined Daisy and Violet Hilton, conjoined twins who performed a tap dancing routine, and they formed an act called the Dance-A-Medians. In the act, Bob and George acted as Siamese twins who sang and danced while wearing blackface. But people told Bob that he was funnier by himself, so he began performing as a single. It was in 1929 when Bob adopted his famous stage name. In the following year, 1930, Bob did a screen test for RKO. He'd been on the vaudeville circuit for the past 5 years and expected to be snapped up by the studio, but they were not impressed and not interested. Bob had failed that screen test. In 1934, 4 years after his humiliating RKO failure, Bob began performing on NBC Radio and made his first film for Educational Pictures of New York, a short comedy called Going Spanish. Now, Bob was disappointed with the film and told a reporter, when they catch infamous bank robber John Dillinger, they're going to make him sit through it twice. Bob's contract was a 6-picture deal, but after that flop and his comment, they canceled the contract. In 1938, Bob was cast in his first feature film called The Big Broadcast of 1938, starring W.C. Fields. In the film, Bob sang a duet with Shirley Ross called Thanks for the Memory. You know the one. This became his trademark song. Bob had a career which lasted more than 6 decades. People around the world knew him from his work in movies and radio. But a lot of people remember him more for something other than just his films or radio shows. There was another way that Bob Hope really made a difference. In 1941, Bob joined the United Service Organizations, the USO, and began leading groups of performers overseas to entertain our troops. In 1943, he brought his whole radio show to the troops. Shortly thereafter, he held the first of his wonderfully popular and uplifting Christmas shows. Bob and an ever-changing group of A-listers entertained the troops during the Korean War, Vietnam War, and Persian Gulf. Many times while Bob Hope and other celebrities were performing, their shows were momentarily interrupted by gunfire and bombs exploding nearby. But when they weren't on stage, Bob and the rest of the performers visited the troops in the hospitals. Bob had one major rule that all the performers had to abide by. No matter how badly injured the soldiers were, no matter how hopeless their situations seemed, they always had to smile. No frowns or tears were allowed. It was their job to make the soldiers feel that there was hope, even if there was none. In 1992, the U.S. military named Bob Hope a 4-star hero. 3 years later, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal by the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. In 1997, the U.S. House of Representatives named him the first civilian honorary veteran of the armed forces. You see, Bob Hope really made a difference. His being there meant a lot to the troops who were lucky enough to see him. Now, you and I may not have the ability to make a difference on the same scale that Bob Hope did, but we can certainly make a difference. So when you're out and about today, give someone a smile. Smiles are free. If you see an old friend, tell them it's good to see them and mean it. If you see a veteran, thank him or her for their service. It'll make them feel better, and it'll make your day a little brighter too. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and as Paul Harvey would say, good day.